There's a problem in software development called scope creep. And scope creep is when there is an original vision and the software is working towards that vision. And there is a temptation, either it's by well, there's a few things that happen. One is maybe the developers maybe the vision changes. Maybe for business reasons, they learn something, or the market changes. They're the people they want to get the software to have different requirements that they didn't realize when they had started the project. And sometimes it's because the developers think, okay, well, it's not that hard to add this other little feature. We'll just do this other thing over there. And so they kind of add that in. And sometimes it's because when the project comes to market, the market ends up having slightly different desires, and that they need to fulfill certain desires for that, maybe that other company that wants to buy their software, this other company. So they add a little bit of this to sell to those guys. They add a little bit more for that. And it ends up being that every new idea adds another wart on a project. This is one of the reasons why a project ends up with like a version 2 rewrite, where they're like, okay, well, our original vision was an absolute abysmal failure. We ended up, the thing that we had in mind when we began, when we first planned, what we ended up with was totally different. But if we had planned better, it would have been easier, or maybe just cheaper, or to get from the vision to the actual thing they bring to market. So so what they do for version 2 is they're like, okay, now that we actually know what we're doing, now that we actually have a vision, we're going to start from that better vision and do it all again and not make the same mistakes and make a really good product. And sometimes that works out, and sometimes it's just really, really difficult, and it's just easier to go and spend more effort maintaining and updating the previous thing. This is why programmers who have, let's call it legacy skills, like maybe they're really competent at some old programming language that was popular in like the late 70s, early 80s kind of thing. But they're really good at it, and there's software that's still made in those languages that needs to be updated, that nobody's been willing they're just too frightened to do it, or maybe there's not enough interest, and it's just such a huge project that the version 2 would be unworkably expensive and time consuming, because there's only like 1 or 2 companies that use the software. All you need to do is add this little feature this year and a little bit more next year, and sometimes these expert mercenaries will have a skill set that and they'll be able to maintain the version 1 with all the warts slowly, and only certain projects get the opportunity to actually get for version 2 because they're popular enough. They have the ability to work on version 2 while they're still updating the warts on version 1, and then they have both released at the same time, and they slowly deprecate version 1 because version 2 is so good that it replaces all the functionality, or they frighten all of their audience by having them, I definitely need to update even though I'm missing these features. And OBS Studio is one of those projects. As of right now, mid 2019, OBS Studio, there was something called Open Broadcaster, which there were 2 parallel projects, and Open Broadcaster was superior in terms of what features it had, but they wanted to rewrite the project into OBS Studio, and they did, and they have, and they don't have anything for its legacy, and plugins are not compatible and all kinds of stuff, but there are features that still aren't in OBS Studio. It's really embarrassing to have certain features just not exist. It's kind of pathetic, actually. Anyway, I want to bring up scope creep for games. Scope creep for games is based around greed. Now, the people with money are not the same as the people who develop the software, are not the same as the people who understand the market, are not the same as players. And there's the problem of income for a game once the game is made. And scope creep in that context would be either at the planning stage or while the game is live. I want to talk about it existing in the form of microtransactions. Sometimes kind of expansions and things kind of to get money to make it a sustainable, to turn a game into a source of revenue long term, as opposed to just one product that you sell up front and maybe you occasionally get some extra sales going forward. But you want to, well, good luck having it be reliable, but you do want to have income going into the future. And so they release things like microtransactions, a new mount, a new skin, clothing, colors, all this kind of stuff. And scope creep exists such that I'm just going to roughly call it the developers, even though there's more parties like investors and stuff like that. So the developers of a game have a vision, but the scope increases because they see opportunities because of greed to capture a larger audience, to get access to a larger number of wallets. So what they do with the game is they add some warts of additional functionality, additional gameplay features, additional whatever the heck, and they'll microtransaction on top of that. So for example, in World of Warcraft, you've got things like pet battles, and now you can sell pets in an online store for an outrageous amount of money, or mounts, which you can do the same. And it's like, it's not pay to win. That aspect isn't pay to win because those aren't actual like combat influencing things. But they do matter in the context of those things. Like in terms of pet battles, if you care about that kind of minigame aspect of stuff, then buying those things at the store, some of them are actually really, really curious and good. Maybe just in certain contexts, but they are actually really good. And I mean, I can say that because of, I think I bought two, and one was for donation to the Japanese tsunami, so I don't feel too guilty about it. It's being sold just as a regular thing without that donation backing it, which really, really bothers me because it was meant to be an exclusive thing. At any rate, and one other, I can't remember why I have it. Maybe it got it for free or something. I can't. Anyway, and I can say that because I was into pet battles when it was first released in Pandaria. I got into it. It was very hard. It was unique. I just need to invent some way to stay logged into the game and keep in touch with my guild mates. And so I latched onto pet battles. And I got good before there were guides or anything like that, before there were all this kind of stuff. And I was third on my server. I was extraordinarily good. And, it went all casual and stuff like that. So I abandoned it right away because it's just, I like things to be hard. I guess that's one of the things that I'm into. So something like pet battles or mounts or all these other things get tied to microtransactions, and it's greed that creates these scope things. And I want to talk about scope in terms of those features for microtransactions. Okay, done that. And I want to talk about them in terms of providing additional points of interest as a way of broadening the audience for a game. That's one of the things that developers think is, well, if I make my game appeal to a broader audience, I'll have more wallets. Everything's good. That's not actually how the real world works. There is a kind of false sense of interest that happens. But what ends up happening is the user base dilutes. And I've been thinking about this problem as to whether or not that's even true. And I think it is getting to be true because there is a large market of really good quality games. It's a mature industry, even though they're making a lot of really dumb mistakes. And what happens is when you have a game that has a whole lot of features it stretches, it tries to grab a large market. And you end up with a game where a person comes into the game, or it's an existing person in the game. So for example, I'm older than Pet Battles. I'm older than, I think I'm much older than Blizzard's concept of these microtransactions, the store stuff at all. Like all older than all that. I've been playing the game for at least, on and off for that long. And so I've seen the scope creep out. And so first you get a bunch of these other people who come into the games who are outsiders, who don't belong there, who are interested in those other things, maybe who are a revenue source, yet another wallet. And maybe the developers really are being successful, having made the game more appealing to a larger audience. Okay, good on them. But here's the problem is now there's a game that is different from the one that I signed up for. And if you want a game to be a games as a service, if you want it to exist going forward, and you want to carry your original game infinitely into the future, you want to keep those wallets for forever. Changing the scope of the project from what originally captured that original audience, increasing that scope, means that audience is now not only, you're still competing with all these other games, all these other interesting things. So there's a problem of, there's an arms race between games in a sense, where I can be pulled away and pushed into Guild Wars 2, for example, is a really spectacular game, like really good. And it has some interface problems, which is why I did not go back to that. It's overwhelming. And so when the scope changes, you dilute the audience. You might grow the audience, but what you end up with is a core that now are the elitists who are there for the core gameplay, and you have all these outsiders who are, maybe they'll play a little bit of the core game, they're kind of really casual, but they're also interested in this other stuff. That's what brought them there in the first place. And you end up alienating that core group. So that core vision that attracted that core group, now you've got this larger vision with this shell of new people that are attracted to the newer content. Fine, you've got more wallets overall, but that inner core is now has these foreigners. And I could talk about human tribalism or something. Maybe that's a part of it, now that I kind of think about it. But I want to talk about it from a different angle, which is now me as a player who's interested in that game. Let's say I was one of the core people of the original vision of the game, and the vision has changed essentially, more or less, and more warts are added on, and microtransactions, other activities, and all this other kind of stuff. I used to get into the game and play the game. And when I played all of the game, all of it. I played all of it. I was interested in all of it. I did everything all the time. I was on board. And yeah, maybe there's an argument that there wasn't a whole lot of choice in the market for other games. Certainly, I mean, when World of Warcraft was new, there kind of wasn't. But now that there's more stuff to do, more activities to do, I log in, and it's not what I signed up for. And I can log in, I can do my core activities, but there is at no point a feeling like I've accomplished anything, because it's dilute in this much, much larger ecosystem of activities. Because I haven't done everything. I've done all the stuff that's kind of the core, the original vision that I was originally interested in. And maybe I'll tinker with some of these new things, but there's going to be stuff I won't like. So when that core vision changes, that core audience is going to start getting more and more alienated, because there's all kinds of other activities that they could do, which they would want to do. Some part of them says they should be doing them because they like playing the game, but it's not the game that they came in for, that they liked. So there's all this stuff that they don't like about the game, that they don't want to do. So it's as though every single little feature that gets added on attracts a bit of an audience, but it does alienate the core audience. So what ends up happening is, instead of having the so-called, you'll have like this elitism, the hardcore audience and the casual audience. And it's like, when one of those people from the original vision logs in, they don't want to play all the game anymore, because there's all these other things, and it's a guarantee that they're not going to like some of these. It's not like, oh, you can just choose to not play those. It's, yeah, I can. It's not, I log in and the player will just choose to not. It's the player will log in and the player will hate those things. And so now that games have gone forward and have changed their scope, you have that core audience who will log in, and they're surrounded by the darkness, the hate of all these other things that they don't want to do. And they not only don't want to do them, they also don't like the people that do them. And there's something about all that seems to erode from a game. So my general point was, a core vision and a scope creep going forward, with the greed of getting more wallets with microtransactions, thinning out the audience, bringing casuals in, alienating the core group. That was a core success. Maybe they couldn't have carried it forward infinitely, but I think keeping that core vision, keeping that really nice and tight, and not being convinced that all this other stuff is just free money, I think that would be longevity. I think that what games like World of Warcraft have done, they've thinned themselves out so far that it isn't just the audience that's damaged. It's them that's damaged, because now they have to have staff who specialize in all the different, like, let's call them demographics that they're appealing to. So you've got like artists that understand what people like in terms of recolors and clothing and stuff like that, and that wasn't really a part of the original game. And you've got other people who understand pet battles, who are doing balancing for stuff like that. And you've got other people that are doing all this other stuff. Now, as the scope has changed, the developers have a bunch of alien people who aren't real developers, who aren't a part of the core vision, and they're being carried forward. And so the company culture has changed, the developers have changed. And you might say, okay, well, that's just progress, that's being inclusive to all these different kinds of gameplay. But go play those other games. Those other games, maybe that same developer could have made another game with that stuff. And they were just trying to tack it all into one project. And the thing is, that'll work. I think that'll work. That'll work for a while. Maybe it'll work for a long while. But I mean, would I recommend some of these games to other people? Probably not, because I don't even know how to describe what the game is anymore, what the activities are, how it works. Because it isn't what I signed up for, and it's not what I can present to somebody else as something that they should or could sign up for. It's just this unfocused haze of, you can log in and not quite know what you're supposed to be doing, and you'll never be done. And so you'll never really know when to log off. You just get burnt out after a while, or just do a bunch of stuff that you love, that you like, that you're okay with. And as your incentives thin out, and as you run into all these other things that you dislike and then hate and then utterly loathe and despise the audience that does like them, and become tribalistic, as that happens, there's this incredible burnout that happens. And I think that's something I'm feeling. Maybe that's something a lot of players have been feeling. And the problem becomes, you want to throw people at it, you want to throw developers at it, and just like make the game, give more content. Well, what developers, what content? Do you even have your original vision? Do you know what you're doing? You've got a huge mixed audience. So how are you going to throw so many developers to fix or to change, to refresh all of those different things. It just becomes an incredible nightmare. What the developers have done in a lot of games is they've creeped out their scope too much, that in-house their people, their programmers, their artists, their politics inside has had to do its own kind of scope creep, and it becomes extremely oppressively difficult to redefine what needs to be worked on to make the game a success, because they don't know who their audience is anymore. They don't know what their game is anymore. They don't know what their vision is anymore. It's just they changed anything they could to tack on more microtransactions because of, well, maybe it's necessity to be greedy, right? But I think, I don't know. I think it's just, I know it's hard to make games, but maintaining a really tight vision, maybe being restricted by being a small company, forces that. A lot of indie games are forced to be really, really tight, and I think maybe that's why they're becoming more and more successful now. It's because they're the one thing, they do the one thing well, and that's it. They don't play pretend. They don't make like bloody cutscenes, or they don't add on little warts and throw a microtransaction on these things. They don't broaden their audience after the fact. They can't. Maybe these big AAA companies can. They're convinced to. Maybe they're profitable doing that, or they think that other people are profitable doing that, and they're losing what indie developers have, which is having a limited scope that makes them, that gives them a player base that will travel with them as they update, that they won't thin out or mix, or they won't dilute the demographics of them, because they won't be able to add more features down the road. They won't be able to dilute the core features. The vision won't creep out. The scope will stay nice and small. And I think AAA companies are having a real hard time with scope creep, just making the game less and less viable as a thing as they become more and more dilute, more and more greedy, less and less capable of maintaining their original vision.